Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's always a challenge to speak after lunch. You must have some food in your stomach. Hopefully, you got some coffee. I've been asked to look at analytics and to look a bit at the future. But as I'm coming from Italy, by predicting the future, we always look at the past. So I've been in the company for the last 18 years. In a number of functions, I incubated a number of programs. I'm now busy both with analytics and data and with country digitization, as we call it. And looking back at the last 20 years that I've been spending at Cisco, it is very clear that we've gone through a number of transitions. So when I joined in '96, the internet was in the age of connectivity. I remember having to explain to my father in Italy what the internet was. And my definition to him was the internet is this technology which is going to cannibalize the fax. So he understood that it was about communication and sending messages. Then I started to work in the end of the 90s in the e-commerce area. So the internet was fueled again by the fact that enterprises, large and small, and governments started to think about e-commerce, e-supply chain, intranets, and major investment came as a consequence of that. Over the last 10 years, we've been looking into the social phenomenon of the internet. People started to use the internet to talk to each other, to interact with social media, and the likes of that. And we are today in front of what I would call the fourth phase of the internet, which is a large transition. It's a transition in which not only our computers and our telephones are getting connected, but every element of the built environment is getting connected to the network. 1.5 years ago, we surpassed the number of people by the number of devices. So we had more devices connected on the planet than people. These devices basically are connected streets. We are putting in knees down parking sensors, which basically help us manage parking in a different way. Wearable devices are becoming reality. So we're basically able to understand and self-actualize ourselves. We're starting to look into changing and improving our lifestyle, for example, with medical devices you've seen there. But also maybe the most interesting piece, at least for the moment for me, is the data that we start producing for those devices. So if you take a new Airbus aircraft, the A380, every half an hour, the engine produces 10 terabytes of information, more than the data that we produced in the human history until 4 years ago. So we produce enormous amount of data. Interesting other data point here, however, is that we tend to store 95% of the data that we produce, but we're only able to utilize 5%. So lots of devices, lots of connectivity, lots of data, but we don't really make use of it in the way we should. So Cisco already a few years ago, through primary, secondary research, and through our own strategy, started to think about how do we approach this whole large market transition in a different way. How do we move away by only looking at things getting connected, the Internet of Things, by looking, for example, on how much data gets produced, and how do we extract actionable insights to those data to enable the right processes, providing information to the right people at the right time, and therefore, as the previous speaker said, redefining the relationship not only between things, but also between people. And I'll give you some examples on how we bring in all those four elements together. So technology is not enough. It's about using the data to rethink about the process and redefine the relationship with people. We call this the Internet of Everything. And you see quite a few information, by the way, by the Cisco booth over there on what we mean in details by this new vision and strategy. So data is becoming what Clive Dunhamby, which is a famous marketer in the UK, says is becoming the new oil. So the richness of companies and nations is not anymore about how much money, how much wealth, how much raw materials they have, but how much information they're able to produce, utilize, and exploit. This is basically the big change in our era. The issue, however, as I said before, is that making sense of this oil, burning this oil in a much greener way, is the issue. So last December, my team ran a global survey with about 1,300 clients, business, IT, small and business, large business, and government, to understand what is the issue today that you have in bringing the Internet of Everything to life in your enterprise or into your government. we thought the issue was going to be about sensors and technology, and the answer for us was quite revelating. The real issues our clients see today is not about connecting things, which are becoming connected. It's not so much about people adopting the technologies. People are already adopting the technology in a very large scale through social media. It is not about rethinking about the processes. Process engineering, change management, been around for a while. But it's really about effectually capturing, storing, and analyzing the data that are produced out of my connected things. That is the biggest issue. And this goes back, and I know that I'm probably preaching to a choir here, to the three issues of volume, velocity, and variety. We produce enormous amount of data, many times at the edge of the network. We copy it and paste it into the center, into the data center. At the moment that we copy and paste the data, this becomes obsolete, uneconomic, and very difficult to use. The second problem is variety. When I was going to university, I remember data entry was done by somebody in a white coat in front of a big mainframe. It was centralized data entry and centralized consumption of this information. You will just print a report. Then with the PC, we started to have the decentralized consumption, but still the centralized data entry. The ERP was your main source of information. Today, we are in an environment in which everything is decentralized, both the data entry, which can be done by somebody or something, and the data consumption, which is completely distributed. I can access information anywhere, anytime, on any device. Right? So now it's a completely different world. So we need to think about how do we bring together data sets and data which are very different from each other. It needs to be compared. How do you compare a tweet with an Excel spreadsheet or a line in the sheet? And the last issue, of course, is the one of velocity, right? We live in a real-time or near real-time society. And when you go online, you want to compare two products. You don't want to get the information by a call center after 3 days. You want to basically buy that product now, right? So these are the three issues. So what we started to think about is how do we, from a Cisco perspective, sitting on top of about $150 billion of installed base around the world, help with that problem? Because if you don't solve the problem, we're not going to be able to create a new market. So we started to think about a transition which is happening today, and we are part of a big ecosystem which is driving this, from a centralized command and control data management system, where the data is in the data center at rest, and I have the three issues, into developing a completely decentralized model, where you're able to do a number of things. First of all, you're able to bring information and the algorithm to the data versus bringing the data to the algorithm. Second, you're able to create, at the edge of the network, actionable insights in real time at a traffic light level, if you think about a smart city example, by looking at what happens to the sensors. If you think about what happened in the last 7 years at the sensor level that we deploy into our cities, into enterprises, three things happened. Sensors became much more context aware. They know where they are through GPS. They know what the temperature around them is. They also became much more energy efficient. In Nice, France, we are deploying parking sensors, hockey puck style sensors, to measure when cars come there, which last about 20 years with a battery. And the third thing which is happening to sensors is they're becoming CPU intensive. So you can run some computing calculations at the sensor level versus the data center. So this transition is basically driving the breaking of the entire silo centralized architectures into a completely distributed one, when you can compute at the edge and the center. When at the edge you take a real-time information, a real-time action, and at the center you do statistical analysis about what happened in the past. So that's how we see the major transition taking place at this entire moment. So you might be thinking, what is the Cisco role in here? Right? So why is Cisco, which is a large networking and services company, moving into this space? Well, the idea for us has been that we are sitting on top of a very large installed base. We have 50 million devices, boxes, routers, switches, and so on, access points out there, telephones. And since more than 10 years, we run analytics. We run analytics at the network level. We sell products and services, and those services allow us to, for example, predict when a node in the network is going to be falling or being down, and basically proactively, through software and cognitive software, go and solve that issue. So 2 years ago, we started to think about what if we open this infrastructure? And what if we start combining analytics and data coming from the network with structured and unstructured sources of information in other parts of the enterprise. And what happens if we start sharing this with our customers? Can we help them better decisions because we see a correlation one-to-one between network performance and business process performance? So we started to look into a whole new architecture. Again, more information is available at the Cisco booth, which is very much distributed, that allow us to, on the data center side, enable the rapid rolling out of data-intensive application in a much more scalable way, but also through data virtualization allow us to basically compute at the edge of the network, at the router and switch level through software, and basically allow some of the decisions to be taken in a distributed way. We run a number of acquisitions in this space. So that's basically what we do, compute at the center, compute at the edge. And we launched last year a program called Intercloud that some of you might have heard about, which is about a federated network of clouds at the global level, so that we don't restrain access to data to the cloud provider that we work with, but we're able to basically mediate and bring together different cloud providers at the data level so that I have unlimited access to data in a corporate environment. So we're bringing together the global level, the central level, and the distributed level into an integrated architecture. That's all I'm going to be saying about Cisco products and solutions. And this is what we do. And there's much more information that you could be finding here in our booth. So if you think about it, the network is becoming the database. More than 20 years ago, Scott McNealy and some basically said the network is the computer, right? Because computing capability was going to be distributed. Now, data analysis and data decision science can become distributed as well on top of the network. This sentence, by the way, was created by a gentleman who's moderating the session over there, Rick van der Lans, which is, to me, one of the most illuminated analysts in this space, and he's based in the Netherlands. The question then becomes, if you develop and deploy this distributed infrastructure, what happens on top of it? And if you take this as an example, this is a transportation and automotive world. It was also mentioned before. While the traditional large players, automotive companies, are still thinking about, what data do I put into my car? How do I converge a couple of networks within my vehicle? All the innovation is becoming outside of the product. Outside the product, you have companies, new entrants like Google, which through an algorithm is redefining how cars basically drive around the city. While transportation departments in city governments are thinking about, since 20 years, self-organizing transport systems and flexible transportation, a few kids in San Francisco in a garage set up a company called Uber, and they basically break the entire public transportation market. While governments, especially in my country in Italy, are still struggling with the unions to figure out do I let Uber in or not, right? So disruption is happening. Uber is based on the concept, of course, of excess capacity, right? So I'm using my car for private reasons, but I can also use it to offer a service to citizens and to travelers. Now, excess capacity is also happening in Europe, in Paris. Robin Chase, which is the founder of Zipcar, one of the big car share companies in the world, is now living in Paris. Brilliant lady. And she set up Buscar. Buscar is a social network where citizens of Paris come together and they use excess capacity on their own cars and they give it to somebody else in the community. I use my car 3 hours a day. The other 21 hours, it is there. Somebody, which I know through my network, gets a certain number of stars, can use my car and basically drive around, and I can do the same with theirs. So it's basically self-organized, community-based, excess capacity, automotive capability. And then, of course, the example that we all know there of a Silicon Valley startup that builds the battery with an intelligent algorithm around this, builds the car, and disrupts the industry. So these are some of the examples in this specific market, but there are many other ones, of outside-in disruption happening with the central role of analytics and of data. If you take this example further, this is having an impact on the whole smart cities discussion. In 2006, I launched in Cisco the Smart City program. And I have to say today, in the smart city global industry, we are still stuck at the pilot level. I haven't found a city yet who has been able to come to us and to any other players in the industry and say we've been able to roll out the pilot from one street into the whole city, right? So you start seeing more and more cities. Barcelona is very progressive in there, who have started through analytics and big data to redefine the business model. The first thing they say is instead of deploying infrastructure for lighting, for parking, for environmental sensors, and for garbage removal, we will converge at least the data on those infrastructure, and we will look into developing what they call an OpEx-based business model. We will consume technology and data, which we produce ourselves or buy as a service, instead of establishing and running this large infrastructure and utilizing it at 20%. So you see a whole change in the way technology is being consumed by cities, integration between different infrastructures and utilities is happening, again with analytics in the middle of this. The other interesting piece about Barcelona is that they're taking an area called 22@. They are opening up literally the infrastructure. They are running open data hackathons, and they are incubating a number of companies who don't create application and services in a lab, but they create it in a large area of the city, which is becoming a living lab. And they've been perfecting this art for the last 10 years. So they know exactly how to build a very diverse ecosystem and to create economic development. Deloitte recently ran a research with them and starting to look into how many companies and how much GDP is being produced in this area as a consequence of a city government basically opening up the infrastructure and converging the data into an integrated platform. So lots of innovation coming at the city area as well. If we then move into an enterprise, a company, a corporate world, we've been spending quite a bit of time with telecom companies, service providers, over the last 3 years, in helping them figure out the correlation between their network performance, their service quality, and the customer experience. When we meet with the CIOs and head of business intelligence of the telecom companies, I always come across the same initial pitch that they give to us. They all come and say, we sit on a huge pot of gold, which is all the data that we have into the network. We are not, however, able yet to mine that data and to correlate the performance of the network with my Net Promoter Score from a client perspective. So we spend quite a bit of time from a consulting and integration perspective in bringing those capabilities together. So that I know that Nick Villa on Friday afternoon works from home, uses lots of video because he does telepresence with his office in the US, and I want to be able to make sure that he gets the right service quality, and if the network goes down, I proactively notify him because I know there is a net promoter into the organization and what the consequence is going to be if he's an unhappy customer. And you can literally drive the correlation by extracting data from network and other sources and basically visualize it. The second thing that we started to do already a couple of years ago was to work in the location-based analytics space with large retailers, first in the US and now quite a few of them in Europe. We were presented a challenge by the CIO of a very large US retailer who came to us and basically said, I want to be able to understand when people are going to come to the cashier to check out from my supermarkets 3 minutes before they do it. And he said, tried everything, statistical analysis, can you help me? So what we did with a couple of partners, we put together a small team, a rapid prototype, it's sandbox team as we call it, who started to extract data from Wi-Fi we provide into those supermarkets and IP video cameras, cross-fertilizing with other sources of data. That company takes, the supermarket takes aerial pictures of the parking lots to count the cars, all the way into the sensors that they deploy into the supermarkets. We blur it together, and we were basically able to create with a data science partner that specific insight. So we helped them understand when people were going to come there. Apparently, if you open the door of the freezer, there is an 87% chance that you basically get to the cash in 3 minutes. They calculated their savings and their productivity increase, and they basically financed the entire rollout to the entire chain with a specific use case. They then came to us and said, okay, can we reuse the same infrastructure to solve other issues? So we started to develop more and more use cases on top of it. The second one was quite simple. They say we've been trying to look into stock replenishment into the shelves for the last 20 years. We try RFID, uneconomic. What can we do there? So we actually patented with them a system with mirrors on the walls, and with 5 cameras on a mega store, you're able to basically zoom virtually into every shelf and figure out by looking at the color of the specific section if the product is out of stock, in stock, or about to run out of stock. So suddenly we were called into a meeting by the CIO of that company with these suppliers, Procter & Gamble and the likes of it, who basically were told, why don't you start working with Cisco in figuring out not only what happens at the stock in my store, but what happens in your supply chain. So you are starting to extend the impact of those analytics offerings and solutions into the entire ecosystem. All the way into what we launched last week at the Expo in Milan. As you probably know, the Expo in Milan is taking place this year, and it's about technology and food. So a year ago, we started to work with Barilla, which is a large pasta company, probably the pasta leader in the world, if you like this type of products. We met the chief marketing officer who came to us with a bag of farfalle, which is a special pasta, and said, can you please hack this product for me? I want to be able to understand exactly what happened from the moment that somebody does something in the soil to the moment my customers put this product into their mouth. I want to be able to understand the economic model. I want to understand how sustainable and how safe this entire value chain is per lot. So don't give me statistical analysis. I want to basically understand it all. So we did the whole research with them and again a couple of partners to figure out exactly where the data was, where the gaps in data were. So we started to make some assumption and to create some extrapolations. And we were able today to visualize, we launched them last week, 2 products, farfalle and it's a sauce, I think it's salsa, I don't remember what's in there. So today you basically can scan this product on your smartphone with an app that they provide, and you can basically see exactly what happened. And it's also be used by themselves to understand how economic the value chain and supply chain is. So you're starting to see, again, this information not only in enterprise, but breaking entire systems. And for those of you who have not been at the Expo, you still have a month to go there, but there's lots of good food and lots of technology to be used. Now, the last step for us, and the next step, is to say, how do we then, out of those initial incubations, not only create solutions and products that we bring to the market, but start to partner with governments in multi-year journey and programs in the digitization space. And the objective for us is to enlarge as much as possible those markets so that we all can compete and try and win them. So in February this year, we did an announcement and signed an MOU with the Prime Minister of France on a program called Country Digitization Acceleration, where we're partnering for the next 3 years with the French government to do a number of things, to help them grow their tech startup environment. The French startup and especially the analytics environment is very, very thriving. Right? So we're investing $100 million of venture funds into French startups to basically help them grow and become part of the Cisco ecosystem. We're also starting to raise the number of networking academy students in France from 10,000 a year to about 100,000 every year. Networking Academy is a program that Cisco runs since more than 20 years, where we're basically training people in the secondary university education areas on networking technologies and on digital now. And 75% of these people basically find a job after a year. So we're starting to say we need to raise the skill level of an entire population to be able to create this new opportunity. And the last one, basically, we are investing into academic chairs, innovation centers, infrastructure programs. And we expect to start looking at least part of that impact from a GDP perspective in the next 10 years. So we are really looking to ecosystem of companies, large and small, with governments coming together around the big data analytics area and launching massive programs. So that's in a nutshell what Cisco has been doing and is doing at the moment in this space. Now, the question that I always take, and that's the end of my presentation, and I always get asked is, how do you start? What does it take? And if you look back at the last 18 years in Cisco, whether it was e-commerce, whether it was social media, whether it is big data analytics, it always goes back to me to 4 major characteristics. You need as an organization to have the right leadership. And the question is not anymore whether it's leadership from the top or from the bottom. It needs to be both. You need people to embrace digital, to embrace this data as much as they embrace e-commerce 15 years ago, and to make it part of their business. This is not something which is delegated to IT or to the business intelligence department. This is the way you do business because you have access to this type of information. The second piece is governance, which is quite interesting in 2 areas. We see successful organizations, first of all, rapid prototyping. So you stop this project the last 18 months. and you start creating fast iterations of your projects, IT projects, that last 6 to 10 weeks maximum, and you apply not the 80-20 rule, you apply the 60-40 rule. 60% is good enough to put these things into production and you refine them. And the second piece, from a governance perspective, you start creating an ecosystem approach. No technology vendor, no consultancy, no integrator can give you the whole answer to your issue. You need to start creating and orchestrating an external ecosystem of partners as well as an internal one. And you need to put people at the center of your program. The third element is interesting in this perspective. You need to develop the right competencies. And what I keep seeing by traveling around the world is a very, very large lack of competencies, a huge opportunity for academic institutions, for people who work at the intersection between data science, design thinking and user experience, and enterprise architectures. You get to the data scientist, you get the enterprise architect, you get the designer, but you don't have anybody who's able to work in the middle. And that's, to me, a huge gap in which we are directing, for example, Network Kit Academy and say, can we create this new figure at that intersection? And the last point, and that's the end of my presentation, is the technology. Organizational success was starting to drive the transition to that platform-based distributed data architecture as opposite to sticking to the legacy command and control model. Thank you.